A journalist picks up an old hobby as she returns to her hometown for a story. Not only does it take her back to her childhood, but it leads her to the love of her life. In the opening scene, we see the protagonist Lori in front of a dance studio. Seeing the Christmas ornament on the ground, she leans down to pick it up when the owner comes. She isn't as excited to see Lori, but Lori explains that she's there for a good cause, wanting to get back the funding from the government because art brings joy to people. Finally, a smile appears on the lady's face as she decides to go through with the interview. After the interview, Lori heads to work where she sees her best friend. He greets her with a coffee and they talk about their tasks. However, they spot their boss, so Ken pushes Lori to talk to her. Unfortunately, the elevator door closes just as Lori gets to her. Sitting by their desks, Ken drops his documents, trying to catch Lori's attention. She finally focuses her attention on him, so he talks about the perfect date he had the previous night. It is not anything work-related, so Lori tries to finish her assignment. Realizing that she's ignoring him, Ken asks her to speak to their boss once again, given that she's applied for the new division chief job. Despite being nervous, Lori decides to speak to Maxine. She almost gives up, but Maxine spots her and therefore invites her into her office. Maxine is well aware of Lori's divisor application, which is why she asks her to write a report on the Ice Palace in Michigan. Given that Lori's from Michigan, Maxine assumes that it would be a great idea, but she's surprised by Lori's rejection. With fear in her voice, Lori lets her know that she can't take the offer before exiting the office. At lunch, Ken can't help but wonder why she turned the offer down. Lori doesn't want to talk about it and even tries to hide it from her sister, but ends up telling her everything. She has a similar reaction to Lori, which only makes Ken wonder more. The reason Lori doesn't want to go back is because she used to ice skate in the Ice Palace and a bad fall had made her leave the town. Ken doesn't think it's a big deal, but she informs him that she was a champion. Both of them think that it would be great for her to go back to her roots, but she reveals the reason she's going back. The Ice Palace is going to be sold and an investor is going to build a shopping center there. No matter how sad it is, Lori chooses not to deepen the conversation. However, Ken interrupts her to embarrass her about not going on a date for more than a year. Her sister is shocked, but Lori manages to de-escalate the situation quickly. Instead, they focus on Christmas. Lori's sister reveals that her husband had gotten a reward from work and it's to spend Christmas in Mexico. Even though they're all going to be together, Lori is worried that they won't get to keep their traditions, given that there will be no snow. It reminds her sister of the days spent in Michigan, which leads to them talking about their memories. Because they've had an amazing childhood, her sister thinks that going back would be a great idea. The following morning, Ken decides to invite her to his Christmas party, but it only motivates her to accept the challenge. Going into Maxine's office, she sits down, ready to take on the challenge. Maxine informs her about the details and that she's hired a local cameraman, before sending her off. As Lori sits down at the airport, she notices a girl opposite her, cleaning her ice skating shoes. Feeling nostalgic, she compliments her shoes and even gives her some advice on how to adjust them to her size. The little girl asks whether she's traveling to the same place as them, so Lori tells her that she used to live there. The father shows up shortly and he recognizes Lori. However, she pretends not to be herself and even lies to him about being someone else. The speaker goes off, announcing that the plane will arrive shortly, so they all get up. The little girl wanders off, leaving the adults alone. The man is surprised that Lori won't be staying for the ball, and while she does act oblivious, she tells him the truth about having worked in the town. Arriving at the inn, Lori is pleasantly surprised at the interior, and gets even more excited as she sees her old skating shoes on display. The host greets her politely and almost recognizes her. Keeping the conversation short, Lori excuses herself as she's late for a meeting. Seeing the Ice Palace after so many years visibly shakes Lori, but she decides to go through with it, given the professional she is. As she gets closer to the entrance, an unfamiliar woman calls out her name. The woman introduces herself as Jen, the camera operator. Through conversation, Jen reveals that a lot of freelancers visit the Ice Palace, and even more documentarists are interested in the wildlife. Lori suggests they discuss over a cup of coffee and Jen tells her about the local place nearby. The biggest advantage: she doesn't have to pay because she drags Tyler with her, who is bad at playing pool, which is the main reason he always ends up paying. Right as she mentions him, he comes out of the building with documents in his hand. Jen pokes fun at him for being a sellout and they start going back and forth until finally heading to the cafe. After getting to know them, Lori returns to the Ice Palace. With butterflies in her stomach, she stares at the white field in front of her, not knowing what to do. Behind the ice machine appears the man she saw at the airport, so they sit down to have a chat. Now that he's sure he knows her, he puts two and two together and assumes that she's back in town for a tournament. She quickly shuts him down, keeping the conversation short. Changing the subject, she asks about the places that have shut down, but he tells her all about the new ones. Given that she almost made it to the Olympics, he hopes that she'll return to the ice rink. Feeling uncomfortable, she shakes her head before exiting awkwardly. As she walks down the sidewalk, she gets a call from Ken. Naturally curious, he asks whether there are any men she's interested in, so she mentions Mark. Ken gets all excited, but she assures him that it's nothing serious. Later in the evening, Lori decides to visit the bar Kevin recommended to her, and somewhat surprisingly, she sees him there. He joins her at the bar and she doesn't seem to be fond of him at first. However, through conversation, they realize that they share the same opinion about the Ice Palace. Upon asking him what dishes he recommends, he mentions Chloe, who is working with volunteers for the many festivities that will take place before Christmas. She reveals that her assignment is about the harm that will be caused in the town by demolishing the Ice Palace, and he informs her that he's the boss. Lori's eyes lit up as she asked for an interview, and luckily, he gladly agrees. The following morning, we see them in front of the Ice Palace as Mark is giving an interview. The Ice Palace is the oldest building in the Midwest, so it wouldn't be nice to tear down such a historical landmark. As he's going on about the beauty of the building, a man chimes in, interrupting the interview. Mark seems to be upset as Chad introduces himself to Lori. Mark calls him out for trying to destroy the Ice Palace. They start going back and forth, so he takes Chad in for a talk. Lori asks for an interview because it will be needed for the article, but doesn't seem to have a good opinion about the man. Jen lets her in on the details and Lori is sure that something suspicious is going on. Chad is confident that he will bring his plan to life, but Mark is determined to keep the Ice Palace. Reminding him that the palace is the beating heart of the town, Mark hopes to talk some sense into Chad, but there's no use. Chad believes that the new center will be of great profit, bringing more people to the town. The assignment is crucial for Lori's career, which is why we see her interviewing the mayor. She's excited to see Lori back in her hometown and wonders whether she's still skating. Her answer is short and polite as she focuses her attention on the interview. The mayor seems to want to keep the Ice Palace, but unfortunately, Mark has not been able to gather the funding for a new lease. While Chad's offer is attractive, the whole town hopes the Ice Palace will stay. Curious, Lori asks why Mark has a hard time letting the palace go, so the mayor tells her that the palace has been in the family for generations. Furthermore, she continues to praise Mark, disclosing his kind act of adopting a girl and raising her to be a wonderful woman. As they finish the interview, Jen and Lori sit outside for a talk. Jen is surprised that Lori had skated as a child. Lori had moved to another city at a young age, so she didn't feel it necessary to mention her skating career. Seeing how everyone talks so passionately about the palace, Lori asks Jen whether it would ruin her Christmas if the palace was demolished. Jen doesn't think that it would ruin it, but certainly is a big part of their Christmas traditions. One of the many festivities is the Grand Ball, which Jen doesn't plan on going to because it's for couples. Being the journalist she is, Lori teases her about Tyler. Blushing, Jen admits to liking him and even dropping hints, but it seems to be of no use since he's so oblivious. Luckily for her, Lori is a great wingwoman who promises to set her up. In the morning, the whole town gathers for the annual tree lighting. In his speech, Mark makes sure to mention Lori, which makes her feel welcome. Before they light the tree, Mark reminds them of the funding, letting them know that it's not too late to save the Ice Palace. Smiles and laughter fill the palace as the mayor lights the tree, fulfilling the tradition once again. The town is filled with joy and love that only motivates Lori to pick up ice skating again. After the ceremony, later in the night, she sneaks to the lobby where her original skates are. The host sees her but decides nothing of it as he knows who she is. Trying not to be seen, Lori manages to sneak into the palace and skate on the icy field, totally oblivious to Mark. Like the owner, Mark sees her but decides not to interrupt her. Lori continues her interview with Mark in the morning, where he reveals that there was an initial plan that fit both his desires and the investors. However, the plan's been replaced with a new one, proposing the ice rink be made on the highway. Lori can't help but feel impressed by his passion for the palace, but it's the community that forms within the palace that he's passionate about. As they move to the display of old tournaments, Lori sees her photo as a child in her skating outfit, which makes her tear up. After the interview, she stays to watch Zoe skate and even gives her some solid advice. Stopping by the booth to get some hot chocolate, she asks Mark whether it's okay to give Zoe some feedback. He approves, so they schedule to meet the following day. Late in the evening, as Lori's going over the footage, she receives a text from her sister. Knowing that Mark used to be her classmate, she calls her sister and asks for everything she knows about him. As Mark's getting ready to close up, his coworker stops by the office to deliver some Christmas lights. Noticing that something's weird, she asks Mark what's going on and Mark complains about not having enough time. She loves the palace as well but advises him to let go and see it as a great opportunity, which he promises to think about. Opening the garage door, Lori sneaks in once again to skate. This time, however, Mark decides to make himself known. Handing her a new pair of skates, he asks her to embrace her talent and to stop beating herself for the fall. Handing her the keys, he wishes her luck before taking off. In the morning, Lori is seen interviewing Chad Reynolds. Despite there being no ice palace in the model in front of her, both Chad and Tyler try to convince her that it's a great idea. Chad assures her that it's a community hub where many businesses will take place. When being asked about Christmas, he says that they'll put up a tree, but Lori gets him once she asks about the new skiing rink that will be located in the outskirts of town. Chad finds himself in a corner, which is why Tyler steps up, repeating the things they've already said just to convince her otherwise. Seeing that she's not excited about the new center, Chad invites her to have dinner with him, which she politely declines. After the interview, Lori enters the rink bravely to coach the little girl. Taking her advice, the little girl manages to pull off one of the hardest moves while figure skating. The girl squeals, excited about her new achievement and the finals. After finishing practice, Lori heads to the workshop with Mark, where civilians can use their free time to express their creativity. Happy to see the miniature Eiffel Towers, she stops to take some pictures while Mark explains how important the figurines are. The great inspiration behind the Ice Palace comes from his great-great-grandmother, who was inspired by a little picture book. Unfortunately for Lori, she hasn't been to a New Year's party at the Ice Palace as she left town when she was young. Mark assures her that she'll have a great experience and reminds her that it's not only about the party but the fundraiser for the ice skating rink. However, she informs him that she's leaving for Christmas as her family is celebrating in Mexico. Out of the corner of her eye, she can't help but stare at her with curiosity. Breaking the conversation, she teases her about the new plan for the Ice Palace, but the mayor doesn't hold back. Without a blink of an eye, Lori asks whether work is all she's in town for. Feeling embarrassed, Lori catches up to Mark, who thankfully didn't hear the comment. Given that Zoe is a big fan of Lori and she's learning a lot from her advice, Mark asks Lori for her opinion about the performance outfit. Lori can't help but laugh at the bad designs, so Mark decides that she'll wear the same outfit from the previous year. Shocked, she tells him that there's no way for her to wear the same dress to such an event, so she promises to help out. Lori gets a call from her boss while she's leaving the building. Answering, she's hoping for some great news but is met with a rather difficult task. Something is missing from the story, which is why her boss asks her to make it juicier. Despite knowing that she'll have to dig into Mark's personal life and potentially ruin their relationship, she assures her boss that she'll finish the job. Later in the evening, Lori comes back to give him the new performance outfit, along with some leg warmers. Mark is thankful to her, so much so that he invites her to have dinner with him. The tension between them makes it awkward, but he redeems himself by mentioning Zoe as well. Remembering her assignment, she tells him all about it, so he offers to at least walk to her stay. On their way to the inn, he makes sure to compliment her as a coach, but she tells him that Zoe is a natural. While being around the ring, it reminded her of her childhood and how she used to be like Zoe. Even though she was great, she couldn't help but feel like a failure after what had happened. Feeling bad for her, he assures her that she's not a failure and that she's still seen as a serious ice skater. The fall had been crucial for her quitting, but the fact that she had disappointed her family had torn her to shreds. To make her feel better, he offers her a job at the Ice Palace as a coach for the young children. Thanking him for the generous offer, she admits to leaving ice skating behind, and that she has a hard-to-please boss. Arriving at the inn, they stop to say goodbye to each other. Love is in the air, but they decide not to do anything about it. Despite visibly wanting to kiss each other, they keep their hands to themselves and wish each other a good night. Lori starts feeling even worse about the whole assignment, which is why she decides to call Ken. He notices the trembling in her voice, so he asks what's wrong. She's conflicted because she doesn't know what to do. The connection with Mark is something she values, but her job is important as well. She feels lost and is close to losing her mind. Ken asks her to calm down and get her head back into the game. Getting to the big city is already something she's accomplished, so all she needs to do is finish the job and come back. Knowing that he's right, Lori decides to send in the article in the morning, even with the fear of losing Mark. Immediately after, she goes to the Ice Palace to skate for the first time in a very long time. However, anxiety rushes over her, so she leaves the skates on the bleachers. Mark is quick to notice the skates on the bench. With a smile on his face, he ends up convincing Lori to go back on the ice, assuring her that he'll be there the whole time. They get on the ice and talk about her beginnings. While she may have started with ballet, ice skating is what she fell in love with. Mark is truly fascinated both by her and the magic the place brings. As he's praising her for her talent, she accidentally trips, which makes them laugh. Of course, it is only followed by him almost breaking his nose. Feeling all the love and support from him, she takes a chance and tries to imitate a rather difficult move. The crowd stares in awe as Lori manages to twist and land perfectly, just like the old days. Practice is over, but we see Lori and Zoe having fun on the ice. Seeing them together brings a smile to Mark's face, that is until he remembers something. Because Christmas is around the corner, he knows that every house will have Christmas cookies and he wants him to be no exception. So, he asks Lori for a favor, assuming that she's an expert. Despite not being great at baking herself, Lori decides to help him and they end up having a lot of fun. As they're preparing the dry and wet mixtures, she remembers her 10th birthday cake that her sister dropped, so she tells him all about it. While they're laughing about the story, Lori notices that he's whisking the eggs way too violently, so she rushes to show him. Putting her hand over his, she demonstrates how he should do it, which only makes him fall in love even more. She notices him staring and begins blushing. After putting the cookies in the oven, Lori goes back to the ice rink where she has a surprise for Jen. Pulling 2 tickets out of her pocket, she hands them to Jen and asks her to invite Tyler. Jen is hesitant, but Lori manages to convince her. Jen heads out as Mark comes in with the cookies in his hand. They take a bite and spit it out immediately as they realize that there's salt instead of sugar in them. Laughing it off, he informs her that he'll be closing the palace earlier because he has some things to do, but makes sure to invite her to lunch once he closes. He asks her in a rather awkward way, but she ends up accepting his offer, regardless. The disaster erupts the following morning. Lori is woken up by her boss on the phone. Getting up, she answers quickly and receives some pretty good news. Maxine tells her that the story is attracting a lot of people, which is why the officials want to speak with her in the first week of January. Unconsciously, Lori complains about not having enough time to make up her mind. Maxine is confused as to what she'll need to make up her mind for. It dawns on her that the story is live for everyone to see, so she does the unthinkable. She hangs up on her boss. While she's rushing to get to Mark first, Chad's already 2 steps ahead. Walking into the palace with confidence, Chad decides to rub it in Mark's face, telling him that he's lost. Unaware of the article, Mark reminds him that he has 36 hours for a Christmas miracle to happen. Quickly picking up on what's going on, Chad makes sure to be the one who shows him every detail of the article first. Feeling hurt, Mark is at a loss for words, but Chad seems to be enjoying it. Knowing that it's too late, Lori paces back and forth on the tree before calling Ken. For the first time, she allows her desires to win and admits to wanting to skate and teach children like Zoe. She knows that the Ice Palace means more than she thinks, so she tells Ken that she wants to stay in the small town. Being the supportive friend he is, he wishes her all the best because he knows she's truly happy. His words of encouragement motivate her to go get Mark, but it seems to be too late. Rushing into his office, she tries explaining herself, but he plays her the audio of her article instead. He is hurt that she sounds so optimistic about the new plan, making it look like he's a lunatic trying to make society love him. With the purest intentions, she advises him to move on from the Ice Palace, claiming that it'll be best for everyone. Not wanting to hear any further, he asks her to leave, assuring her that it's best if they stay away from each other. Despite their situation, Lori makes sure to be in the crowds as Zoe has her big moment. Zoe jumps for joy once she sees her, but the same can't be said for Mark. As the bell rings and the host can be heard, Lori advises you to be as relaxed as possible and to believe in yourself. As they kiss her for good luck, she heads backstage, leaving the 2 of them together. Keeping it short, Mark tells her that he's glad she's there before letting her know about her seat. Throughout the whole ceremony, they can't help but look at each other despite being mad and hurt. While one love story seems to be standing on glass legs, another story is just about the blossom. Working around the office, Jen takes the chance to invite Tyler to the ball. Once the coast is clear, a smile grows on Tyler's face as he accepts her offer. Overwhelmed with joy and not knowing how to react, Jen grabs some decorative paper to put it where it's supposed to be. However, she makes a life-changing discovery by grabbing the old plan for the new complex. Curious, she shows it to Tyler and he confirms that it's the old module. However, once he sees the legal documents, he realizes that something's missing. After grabbing hot chocolate, Lori heads back to her seat, but Chad gets in her way. Thinking that she's in favor of his idea, he thanks her for the article and even invites her to be his date to the ball. Feeling disgusted, she declines his offer and luckily, Zoe's name is announced excusing herself. She rushes to the front next to Mark and watches Zoe as she pulls one of the most difficult moves. The performance goes great and Zoe scores a 3rd place. Mark and Lori run to congratulate her with the biggest smiles on their faces. As Zoe moves to talk to other people, Mark takes the chance to apologize to Lori for being so harsh to her, and she does the same for not letting him know beforehand. At least they're leaving on a good note, but that doesn't seem to be enough for the townspeople. As Lori checks out of the inn, the host calls the mayor, who ends up convincing Mark to go after her. Jen and Tyler beat him by getting there before him and explaining the whole situation to her. The original plan had been more fitting to Mark's liking. That is, keeping the traditions from the Ice Palace. Upon pitching the 2nd module, Chad had forgotten to fulfill every legal obligation, which gives them a chance to save the palace by midnight. Knowing that the future of the whole town is in their hands, they rush to the palace where they find the mayor, and waste no time telling her immediately. As they're explaining everything to her, Mark walks around the inn devastated, thinking that he might have lost Lori forever. Being the reasonable person she is, Madam Mayor asks everyone to calm down and relax. She sends Jan to the hairdresser because she doesn't want to see her looking bad as she and Tyler debut their relationship. The same goes for Tyler. She tells him to iron any kind of shirt to appear as a gentleman. When it comes to Lori, she doesn't worry as her daughter has a closet full of glory. Mark tells the owner of the inn that he doesn't feel like going anymore, so the man reminds him that it's his community he's going to let down. Despite Lori not being there, he has to show up for his people, and luckily he changes his mind. Plotting the perfect plan, Lori asks Madam Mayor for Chad's number so she can ask him to be his date at the ball. In the sea full of people, Lori manages to stand out as she enters the room in a beautiful red gown with the most gorgeous white fur. She catches everyone's attention, of course, Chad's as well. Almost immediately, she asks Chad where Mark is. Chad becomes worried, so she puts her hand in his and they walk to find Mark. Through the crowds, Lori spots a familiar figure, and once he turns around, she is surprised to see Ken there. He smiles from ear to ear, happy to see her after a while. Looking at Chad, Ken asks whether he's Mark, and with a disgusted look, she says no. After searching for a while, Lori finally spots Mark. Chad tries to interrupt their moment, but Madame Mayer takes him away. With hope in her eyes, she asks him to come with her. As they get to a table, Jen, Tyler, and Lori unravel the whole issue and expose Chad's scam attempts. The land ownership had all been fake, which would have only led to the palace being destroyed without a new location. Luckily, the truth is out, and as Chad threatens to sue with the best lawyers, Madame Mayer promises to sue with the best attorney. As if the news hasn't been great already, Mark chimes in to tell everyone that he has gotten a response from a company willing to fund them. The civilians jump for joy, and all of them get on the dance floor shortly after. In the sea of people, Mark's eyes only find Lori, and they share their first kiss. Love is in the air as the two lovebirds join the crowd and dance the night away. Their love is so strong, it even grows even stronger as we see them a year later.